I think we're working. My friends, welcome tonight. It is Wednesday, March 10th, 2021. My name is Glenn Rawson, and the title of our devotional tonight is, "Oh God, Help Us." First of all, welcome. Glad you're here. Thank you for joining me. Some of you may have seen the little teaser that I did this afternoon about chicken eggs on the highway. I will talk about that later in the broadcast. I haven't mentioned this for quite a while, but there are two Facebook pages that these devotionals broadcast on. One of them is History of the Saints, and the other one is Glenn Rawson Stories. Now, if you can't find it on one, please go to the other, or if you haven't liked one or both of those pages so you can keep in touch, please take a moment to like both of those pages or follow them. And again, I wanted to mention this right at the top of the program tonight. There are a lot of you who have signed up to receive the free stories. Thank you. I am honored that you would do so and would invite you to share those with anyone that you want. One more thing by way of housework tonight. I had a strange experience last night. I was lying awake in the wee hours of the morning, and I was thinking about the new missionary book that's coming out, and suddenly I was struck with a thought. I remember when I was younger in the church, and people would stand up in sacrament meeting, and they would give talks about go do your missionary work and invite your neighbors and find someone for the missionaries to teach. And I remember how frustrated those talks sometimes would make me feel, and sometimes those meetings would cause me, this is just me, to walk away with a deep sense of guilt because I wasn't as good of a missionary as I should be. It suddenly occurred to me that maybe there are some of you out there that think this book, this new book that we're coming out with, is just for missionaries, or it's just about missionaries. But it's not. Do you enjoy a good conversion story? I do. I love to hear stories about missionaries and miracles and conversion experiences and things like that. This is a book of stories about converts and conversions and missionary experiences. It's not at all a book that says, go do your missionary work or else. It's not that kind of book. So I would really hope that if you enjoy a good story about missionaries and converts and conversion experiences, you would consider this book, take another look at it. Now, to begin with tonight, I ask you, what is the greatest expression of love known to man and gods? Well, at least in part, it's this. It was October 1846 when word reached Garden Grove, Iowa, that Nauvoo had fallen to its enemies and the last of the Latter-day Saints had been driven from the city, forced literally into the river and across the Mississippi, and were now huddled and starving and suffering on the west bank of the river, living in a swamp. Notwithstanding they were refugees themselves, Luman Andrus Shurtliff and a group of men from Garden Grove received word, pulled together wagons and teams, and set out to rescue their stranded brethren back in Nauvoo. Luman was elected the captain of the company. On October 18th, 1846, he set out for the river, the Mississippi, leaving behind a pregnant wife due to deliver at any time. He recorded that 75 cents was all the expense money raised to accomplish a journey of 340 miles for a large group of people. When they had gone 150 miles, they ran out of money and supplies and were forced to stop and work to obtain the means to make it the rest of the way to the poor camp. Finally, Luman and his brethren arrived and described the situation of the refugees as follows, quote, I came to the camp of the poor, sick, and persecuted saints. Many places where there had been camps were now desolate and without inhabitants. In others, a ragged blanket or quilt laid over a few sticks or brush comprised all the house a whole family owned on earth. The occupants lay stretched on the ground, either sick or dying. Others, perhaps a little better off, had a few boards laid up on something. More were sick, he said, than well. Continuing, Luman said, I spent the first day in learning their circumstances and ascertaining who it was my duty to take away, as I could not take them all. And I learned that we were the last company that there could be this fall. I made up my mind to take the poorest of the poor and the sickest of the sick. End of quote. After making preparations as best he could, Luman and company prepared to leave. It was October 31st, 1846. He loaded some 60 people into the wagons with all that they owned. Most of those taking flight were sick. Luman recorded this, quote, all the provisions put together would have made only one good meal, and we were now about to start in November with this poor sick company on a journey of 170 miles through an uncivilized and mostly uninhabited wilderness. I felt like crying, "Oh God, help us," as we left. I looked back and saw a few weeping saints left behind. How to live through the winter, I knew not, but God knew. End of quote. 2 weeks later, Luman with the refugees arrived in Garden Grove, having accomplished a journey of 340 miles with scarcely no means. Luman's wife, Altamira, gave birth to a son while he was away bringing in the poor saints. I repeat, what is the greatest act of love known to men? Jesus said, "By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another. Greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends." I am grateful for those like Luman Andrus Shurtliff and his brethren then, and those now who are willing to leave the comfort of home and family and friends and go out and serve and save when they scarcely have little to give themselves. Thank you, all of you who have done it and are doing it right now. Next story. When I was preparing to go on my mission, I was at the Missionary Training Center in Provo, and in those days, I don't know if they still do, we happened to go down on the campus to the BYU bookstore, and as I was walking through the store, I happened to see a copy of Joseph Smith's Lectures on Faith, just a small booklet. I bought it, thinking I'm going to learn about faith. I read that book several times while I was a missionary, and I confess, I don't think I understood a word of it. To be honest with you, I'm not sure I completely understand it yet. Faith is a small and simple thing, as President Oaks said, but oh, so huge and complicated is faith. I don't really claim to understand all there is to know about faith, but I do know that this story from my friend Lynn Kenley teaches a vital part of what it means to have saving faith. As a lad of 15 years old, Lynn Kenley lived in Wendover, Utah. Lynn told me that in those days, this is a long time ago, Wendover, Nevada was mostly just a gas station and a border. Well, at that time, living in Wendover, Utah, his family had only one car, and his dad had a rule governing that car that, yes, Lynn could borrow the car, but he couldn't go very far or be gone for very long. Kind of dumb rules, Lynn thought at the time. Wendover doesn't cover that much territory, he said. Well, one night, Lynn and two of his friends decided to see how far they could go in 15 minutes. They planned it out carefully. 7 minutes out, 1 minute to turn around, and 7 minutes back. Makes perfect sense to three 15-year-old kids. Now add to that, Nevada at that time didn't have a speed limit on the open highway, so off into the Nevada darkness, Lynn and his friends went, headed west in Dad's 1949 Cadillac. 7 minutes out, Lynn attempted a quick turnaround and got stuck. He couldn't get out, and no cars were coming. I knew, Lynn said, I was a walking dead man. Finally, a tow truck came along. Miracle of miracles, it was someone they knew. But in pulling the car back up on the highway, one of the tires was ruined. Well, the clock is running. They finally got the spare on and headed back to town. Very, very late. Lynn said, we headed slowly back to my impending doom. I took the other two home, he said. They didn't need to see the bloodshed. And then went to meet my dad, way past the short amount of time usually allotted. The interrogation never happened. Just the question about what had happened. Quietly, he said, this is his dad, that I would have to pay to replace the tire, and turned back into the house. Now, Lynn said, remember, this was 1953. I was working a summer job for about 50 cents an hour. I discovered the next day that the big 16-inch tire for a '49 Cadillac was $89 and change. There went those summer wages in one fell swoop, he said. Well, evidently, nothing more was said on the matter. A couple weeks later, Lynn was driving his dad's car when the community fire alarm went off. Lynn raced home. His dad jumped in the car and they sped to the fire. As they arrived on the scene, a neighbor was shouting that the owner was still in the home. Lynn said his dad went into the home and saved the unconscious homeowner, saved his life. Then Lynn said, after the fire was out, we were cleaning up the hose, and my dad walked over to where I was helping, put his arm around my shoulder, and simply said, what if this had happened while you were stuck out of town? Lynn said, I realized then that living in the home of a fire chief with only one car created an interesting situation for the entire family. And I finally understood, he said, just how important it is to follow the rules, even when you don't understand the reasons behind the rules. And then Lynn concluded wisely, trust the rules. They are there to protect, not to hamper or harm. End of quote. Wise counsel. Especially in a world now full of skeptics, doubters, and those who have the right to go and do as they will. We live in a time, my dear friends, when covenants and the commandments and behaviors that accompany them are too often deemed as restrictive, inconvenient, and sadly, expendable. I hope and I pray that you are one of those who has faith in the Lord's rules. This next story. This isn't part of the story, but just by way of introduction. I remember an instance, this has got to be 25 years ago. I was a relatively new seminary teacher, I guess, and it was a very stressful time. I was a student at the university. Things were, well, it was the spring of the year, finals, closing out a seminary year, etc., etc., all these things. And one day I was just so weighed down. And whether it was proper or not, one of my students, a young woman, she was probably 3 or 4 inches taller than me. One day she just walked up to me and gave me a hug. Now, I know that that's not exactly something you should do, but that simple little act of kindness made all the difference in the world. She didn't mean anything by it. All she meant to say was, "Brother Rawson, I care." And that's how it came across. Kindness matters. If you don't mind, may I tell you the story of a single, simple act of kindness that affected the lives of billions, even you. One act of kindness changed the world down to the present day. The ancient patriarch Abraham was old and well stricken in age. He was concerned that his son Isaac was not yet married. So he called for his most trusted servant, and in the custom of the day, sent him back to the land of Abraham's ancestry to negotiate a wife for Isaac. Well, that may seem a strange custom to us, and it is a strange custom, but for the servant, it must have been a daunting task. He was to travel to a land he did not know, find a family he had never met, and persuade a girl to leave her home and kin forever and marry a stranger. Dubious, but faithful, the servant loaded 10 camels and set out for Mesopotamia. Arriving at the well on the outskirts of a village just as the women were coming to draw evening water. Now, which maiden is she? How does he find her? The servant prayed, quote, "O Lord God of my master Abraham, let it come to pass that the damsel to whom I shall say, 'Let down thy pitcher, I pray thee, that I may drink,' and she shall say, 'Drink, and I will give thy camels drink also,' let the same be she that thou hast appointed for thy servant Isaac." End of quote. We didn't even finish the prayer before a very lovely young woman approached the well, filled her pitcher, and started back. He ran and asked for a drink. She then gave him a drink and then said, "I will draw water for thy camels also." Now you think, oh, that's so sweet. Do you know how much water 10 thirsty camels can drink? I looked it up. More than 250 gallons. No one had known the like of Rebekah. The servant watched her in wonder. Could this be her? Could it really be that easy? She had passed the first test, but was she of the covenant lineage? She was. Rebekah invited the man to her home, where he presented his incredible story to her and her family. The next morning, Rebekah's family put the decision to her. "Wilt thou go with this man?" And Rebekah said, "I will go. You thought your courtship was strange." It was evening. Isaac went out into the fields to meditate. In the distance, he saw the camels coming. From atop the camel, Rebekah saw Isaac and asked, "What man is this that walketh in the field to meet us?" I'm more inclined to think that from a distance she looked and saw him, and she said, "What man is this that walketh in the field to meet us?" When she learned that it was him, it was the man. She came down from the camel, veiled her face as a bride would, and went to meet him. Isaac took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. It's one of the great love stories of the Bible. Rebekah became the mother, I'm quoting now, Rebekah became the mother of thousands of millions. Nations today call her mother, probably as children of Israel, even you. And all because of a timely act of kindness coupled with simple faith. Oh, my friends, kindness matters. Angels watch. Next story. Some years back, I was driving a truck along a road seldom traveled. I passed through a little town, Randolph, Utah. Some of you watching have commented that you know where Randolph is, or you're from Randolph. Anyway, I was driving the rig and I came through the little town of Randolph, Utah, when all at once I was struck with the sense of deja vu. I was transported back 32 years earlier, when I was traveling along this same stretch of road to the west of Randolph. I had taken a load into Evanston, Wyoming, and now I was on my way home. Now, my normal truck, the one that I always drove, was in the shop for service and repairs, and I had been given a loaner. And I was driving the truck that no one wanted. You know, I don't know if you appreciate this, but a driver gets a feel for his truck. All of its quirks, its idiosyncrasies, they sort of marry together, and you know how to drive them. I was not used to this rig. It drove funny. It was a piece of junk. I was moving along at the speed limit the other side of Randolph. It had been raining and the highway was wet. I had the radio turned up and I was enjoying my tunes. I also had a Hostess fruit pie in my right hand. Life was good. Suddenly, I came up over a little rise in some sand dunes, and there, right on the other side of that rise, was a four-wheel drive pickup idling down the highway. In a split second, I processed the following. The driver was a woman. She was sitting in the cab looking left and right, uncertain where she was going to turn. That's the first thing. Second thing that registered in a millisecond, she was too close. There are banks of sand on both sides of the road. I couldn't go around her. Nor did I dare to attempt to go around her for fear I would run right over the top of her. I did the only thing I could do. I stomped down on the brakes and hoped for the best. But the best was not what happened. Immediately on that rain-slick highway and those tight brakes, the tractor brakes were tighter than the trailer brakes. The truck slid sideways out of control. I will never forget that feeling of sliding sideways in an 18-wheeler. The trailer started coming around to meet the tractor. The last thing I remember was seeing my truck running sideways down the middle of the road, and then everything went nuts. When the chaos finally stopped, I was still upright and on my wheels, sitting in the driver's seat. My trailer was right there at my driver's door. The tractor had turned 180 degrees, and I was now headed back to Randolph the way I had come. And that's not the worst of it. In that moment, I became conscious. I remembered my fruit pie. In that moment of immediate reaction, when my world went out of control, fruit pie in my right hand, I had gone like that. My fruit pie was mush, all over my hand and all over my seat. What a mess. I was angry. Oh, mama, I was angry, really angry at a foolish driver who had probably got herself killed. I kicked open my door, jumped to the ground, and ran around the rig to the other side, expecting to see this woman all tangled up in the wreckage of my trailer. But when I got there, she wasn't there. Where'd she go? I turned and looked down the highway, and there she was, several hundred yards down the road. I was amazed that she had escaped. She must have seen me bearing down on her out of control and stomped on the accelerator and burned rubber. Either way, she got clear. And then her backup lights came on, and she started coming back toward me. I stood there, fuming, just waiting for her. I was going to give her what little peace of mind I had. When she stepped out of the pickup, she was visibly shaken, even pale, and she was so apologetic. She felt terrible. I didn't have the heart to chew her out. She walked away without a scratch, no damage to her. The damage to my rig, even though I was tangled up and jackknifed on the highway, was minimal. I managed to drive it out without causing any damage to her, the road, or anything serious to the truck. And both of us went on our way. I guess the biggest loss was my fruit pie. Now, 32 years later, there I was on that same stretch of road, and I thought of the woman. And that moment with her has come to epitomize the danger of indecision. At best, being indecisive makes us weak, worthless, and annoying to those around us. We can't make up our minds. At worst, being indecisive and uncommitted makes us dangerous, whether it is the highway or the Lord's covenant path. Know where you're going. Decide your decisions before you have to. Commit. Boldly commit. A bold, right decision made once never needs to be made again. Who's on the Lord's side? You are. Okay, take a break for a second. My friends, I have been working on recording the audio for that new novel, Tempering Steel. And I'm excited. That book is going to the designers even as we speak. It's about to be laid out, and the audio book is in the process of being recorded right now. And even though I'm the author of the book, I'm also the one that's reading the audio. I can't tell you how excited I am to share that novel with you, Tempering Steel. As soon as we have the cover designed and laid out, I'll start showing you pictures of it. I am so excited to share this work with you and hope that this fictional story, an autobiographical fictional story, will help, will edify, and will have some meaning to you. Secondly, the Witnesses Books bundle from History of the Saints. Those are still available. Quite a number of you have purchased those and shared them with friends. I just wanted to make you aware that the Witnesses books are there. They're available now, and you can order those bundles and you can share them with friends or give them as gifts for those that you would like. Go to historyofthesaints.org. Now, I haven't gotten a text from Annie, so I'm assuming that everything's okay. President Hunter once said something like this, and this is a paraphrase. When we go with Christ, nothing can ever go permanently wrong. If we don't go with Christ, nothing can ever go permanently right. Well, this story is an example of the Lord making miracles out of mistakes. I love this story. It was shared with me by their descendants. Canute Peterson was born in 1824 on the beautiful fjords of Norway. I've seen them, and they are beautiful. In 1836, Canute's family emigrated to the United States and to Illinois, and settled in the Norwegian community of LaSalle, Illinois. About a year later, his father passed away, and Canute shouldered the burden of supporting his invalid mother. In 1842, they and many others in their little Norwegian community joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And then, with the sudden passing of his mother in 1848, Canute decided to go west and join the saints. Thus it was that on April 18th, 1849, Canute, with 21 others, left LaSalle, Illinois, to come west. He mentions that, including himself, there were several young people on that journey. Well, they went about 200 miles, crossed over the Mississippi River, and came to Burlington, Iowa. Strangely, the city was deserted, and there was fresh lime spread everywhere. There had been a cholera outbreak in the city. Well, Canute and the group of Latter-day Saints passed through quickly and went about 8 miles beyond the city and camped. Canute described what happened after that. He said, quote, "When we came to Chardon Point in Iowa, Sister Sarah Ann Nelson was seized with a violent attack of cholera. The sisters did all they could for her relief, but it was of no avail. I became impressed to go down into the woods on the creek and pray to the Lord for her recovery. Here I earnestly besought the Lord that he would spare her life." And then he says, "I became so filled with the Spirit of the Lord that I thought I hardly touched the ground while going from the place of prayer to the wagon. When within a few rods of the wagon, I could hear her groan. I went to the side of the wagon nearest to her head, put my hand between the wagon cover and the wagon box, and placed my hand on her head and silently rebuked the destroyer. She immediately straightened herself out of the cramp, smiled, and told the sisters, 'I'm healed.' She was well aware," he said, "whose hand it was that had touched her. She had the disease no more." End of quote. In the days that followed, others were similarly afflicted with the cholera, but each was administered to, and it appears from the record, each was healed. Young Canute was the voice. Well, they traveled on until they reached Canesville, Iowa, on the Missouri River, where Canute describes, quote, "It was while camping here that Apostle Orson Hyde, according to previous arrangements, came about 4 o'clock in the afternoon of July 2nd and tied the knot of matrimony between Sarah Ann Nelson and myself." End of quote. They came on to Lehigh and settled in, they came on to Utah and settled in Lehigh. Then in 1852, Canute, along with many others, was called as a missionary, and he was assigned to serve in Norway, get this, for 7 years. With Elder Orson Pratt and many others, they commenced their journey. What happens next now, I now quote from historian Chad Orton, who published this account in BYU Studies. This is what happened after Canute left. Quote, "While Canute Peterson served a mission in the early 1850s, his wife, Sarah Nelson Peterson, had to raise the family's wheat crop. Receiving no offers of help, she had to plow and plant her fields herself, only to be told after the fact that she had planted her seeds too late and too deep to raise a successful crop. Soon, all the wheat in the community was growing well, except for Sarah's, leaving her to anxiously wonder how her family would survive if there was no crop that year. During this time, however, a great tragedy struck the settlement. As had been the case with the first settlers in the Salt Lake Valley a few years earlier, Mormon crickets descended upon the fields. In spite of the settlers' best efforts to fend off the invaders, most of the wheat crop was destroyed. After the pests had moved on, Sarah's wheat began to grow. Because her field of wheat was the only one that had not been devastated by insects, her crop took on added importance. During one irrigation turn, the water suddenly quit flowing onto her fields. She told her 5-year-old son, Peter, to run up to the top of the field and see why the water had quit coming. Soon afterward, the water started flowing again. Her joy was soon tempered, however, when Peter did not return. With her baby in her arms, she frantically ran to find her son. To her relief and concern, she found him sitting in the irrigation ditch where the dam had been, with water up to his chin. When Peter had reached the dam, he had discovered that it had been broken. Unable to repair it and knowing how badly the wheat was needed, he plopped himself down in the ditch and used his body to create a dam to redirect the water to their fields. Lovingly, Sarah, who was known for her sense of humor, pulled him out of the ditch, held him close, and said to him with tears running down her cheeks, "Oh, Peter, what a good little dam boy you are." Her attempt at humor was lost on the 5-year-old, who assumed that his mother swore at him. "I was only trying to help," he declared. To this she responded, "Oh, I know, you sweet little helper. But the water was getting so deep you might have drowned yourself, and then what would I have done? You're the only little man I've got to help me with Papa gone away on his mission. Promise me you'll never wedge yourself in the ditch like that again." Well, Sarah's fields produced 60 bushels of wheat. Her and Peter's efforts helped feed the settlement that winter. In spite of the fact that she gave away a portion of her wheat to others in the community, there was enough for her family. She even placed some of the wheat in a jar to serve as a reminder of what she had accomplished. That wheat became known in the family as salvation wheat. End of quote. According to the descendants of Canute and Sarah Peterson, that wheat helped save Lehi from starving that year. When Canute learned what had happened, he called it salvation wheat and said that when he died, he wanted that bottle of wheat buried with him. He loved that strange and beautiful incident and the salvation wheat very much and often spoke of it. Then, true to his wish, when President Canute Peterson passed away in 1902 in Ephraim, Utah, the bottle of salvation wheat was placed at his feet and buried with him. I will speak more of Canute Peterson later, a great man and his wife. I've been listening to the living prophets a lot over the last few months. I don't hesitate to say, thank God for President Nelson. His counsel, his spirit, his promises have saved me, and I am so grateful. The world we live in is unlike anything we've ever known before. It is darkening even more grossly than it's ever been before. The incivility of society is startling. The cancel culture rising up around us, I've never seen anything like it. We live in a world darkened and confused. Well, if it has caused you any alarm, and it should, this story is for those of you who seek the light and who hunger and thirst after truth. I am the light of the world, Jesus announced one day in Jerusalem, John chapter 8. This declaration, of course, on the Temple Mount, sparked a confrontation with the Pharisees that ended in them taking up stones to kill him in the holy temple, of all places. As Jesus walked away from them, he passed by a man blind from birth. The disciples asked him why this man was blind. And Jesus responded that he was not blind by any fault of his own or that of his parents, but that the works of God may be made manifest in him. Or in other words, this blind man, somewhere in the area of the Temple Mount, was born to be a miracle. He was foreordained to be a miracle. Notwithstanding that the Pharisees were after him, Jesus stopped, spit on the ground, and with the spit made clay, and then rubbed the clay on the man's eyes, and then told him to go to the pool of Siloam and wash. Siloam is similar to the Old Testament name Shiloh, which is another name for the Messiah. The waters of Siloam were holy to the Jews at that time. Now, what you don't understand just by reading the text is when Jesus told the man to go to the pool of Siloam and wash, that was not a walk around the corner. From the Temple Mount down through the city of David to the pool of Siloam, all the way down to the bottom of the ridge, that was a long walk for a blind man through what might have been crowded and busy streets. Nonetheless, the blind man obediently made his way to the pool and washed. And just as Jesus promised, he returned seeing. Seeing him now, seeing, this caused no small stir among the Jews. Everyone knew who he was, the blind beggar. And now, all of a sudden, he can see? But how? It presented a terrible dilemma to the Pharisees. Why? Because the man was whole and healed, and everyone knew, but Jesus had healed the man on the Sabbath. So obviously, Jesus must be a sinner. But how could a sinner do such a miracle that could only have come from God? But Jesus could not be of God, for if he were, then they were not. The lowly beggar was summoned before the mighty Sanhedrin, the wisest men of the Jews. With great courage, the blind man defended his healer before them. But they railed on him, saying, "Thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke unto Moses, but as for this fellow, we know not from whence he is." The absurdity of that statement was just too much for the beggar. He said, in effect, "Why, this is marvelous. You are God's holy men and high priests, and here we have a miracle that clearly comes from God, and you don't know where the man comes from who did it?" With grit in his soul, the blind man declared, if this man, meaning Jesus, were not of God, he could do nothing. They couldn't answer that. So they did what the weak always do. They insulted him and excommunicated him. They cast him out. Jesus found him and further enlightened his soul, and then he added, "For judgment I am come into the world, that they which see not might see, and that they which might see might be made blind." Jesus had brought light into a blind man's eyes, and in so doing enlightened every Jewish soul who knew the blind man. The sun had undeniably risen again over the darkened world of the Jews. If now they could not see the sun for what it was because they chose to be blind. Today, and President Nelson has affirmed this, today, the sun is ablaze again with noonday intensity. Great and marvelous things are happening before our very eyes. Do we see them? Can we see the light of God around us? My dear friends, if your world is dark, I'm a witness to this truth. It doesn't have to be. Look unto the sun. Look unto the prophets of God. Look unto the Book of Mormon. See the light. It's there. This is another simple story that I promised you tonight from my son, Adam. Some years back, our family was gathered around on a Sunday night. This is when the children were all at home, so obviously it's quite a while ago, taking turns sharing something we had all learned. We heard everything from the children, from the profound to the silly. Then it came to 9-year-old Adam. Now, mind you, Adam is on his mission right now, so it tells you it was a while ago. It came to Adam, and he told us of something he had learned a few years before when he was about 6. He said it was during family scripture study. A verse was read that told Adam that if you do something wrong, you should pray to Heavenly Father, and He would come down and touch you. That lesson stuck with him. Not long after that, Adam had a dream. In the dream, he had done something very wrong, and he felt terrible. And then he said he saw a bright light. It was the Savior. He came down and spoke to Adam, telling him that if he would go and say he was sorry, he could feel better. Jesus then stretched forth his hand and touched my little boy. Adam said the touch made him very happy and made him feel as though he could do this. He then went to his little sister and said he was sorry. As he did, he described that he felt good. He felt, and I'm quoting, righteous and sin-free from that moment forward. Over the next week, the dream came back to Adam again and again, and each time it did, Adam said he felt good about repenting. I asked him what he learned from the dream, and my beloved little man said, if you repent, you can always feel good about yourself. And he's right. Just as I did last time, for the sake of time, I'm going to skip one story and tell it to you next time. But there is one last story, and if I don't tell it tonight, I might have a mutiny. It's some strange story about an egg. Okay, here's the story about the egg, if you caught that little tease this afternoon. This happened this morning. I wrote this story down this afternoon. I woke up this morning, 6 o'clock, 6:30, and just as the sun was coming up, I went out to run. And as I sometimes do while I was out running, I was listening to a conference talk on them pod things, them ear things. It was a talk given in 2017 by Elder Dallin H. Oaks, where Elder Oaks talked about the meaning in the scriptures of the term the world. And Elder Oaks went on to caution us to stand apart from the slow stain of the world. He defined what the world was and then said, don't live after the manner of the world. In short, the world is not our home. We came from a better place to prove ourselves and go back. While we are here in mortality, we are to stand and live in holy places apart from wickedness. Well, that was the upshot of the talk. I had just finished the talk and was running along a country street out here in Syracuse or West Point, I'm not sure where I was, when I came upon a most unusual sight. Right there on the side of the road, just on the edge of the asphalt, was a chicken egg. That's right, a chicken egg. It wasn't smashed, it was an intact chicken egg on the edge of the pavement. Well, I gave it a glance as I was running and went right on past it. And then something said, "Whoa, slow down, boy, and go back and look at that. You don't see that every day." So I stopped, and I turned around and I went back and looked at the chicken egg. How in the world did a chicken egg, all intact, wind up on the asphalt, on the highway? Then I noticed that on one end it had a tiny little crack and some of the contents of the egg had leaked out. I looked around trying to figure out how that chicken egg got there and noticed that just to the right of the road was a ditch, a culvert and a bridge, and a big net wire fence. On the other side of the fence was a whole flock of chickens with a very proud rooster strutting among them. The fence between the road and the chickens was a broad weave net wire fence that any chicken could walk through in a moment. From where I stood, it appeared that a hen had walked through the fence and up on the edge of the road and left her gift right there on the asphalt. I took some pictures and went on with my run, knowing that I had seen something significant, but having no clue what it was. So I kept running. I connected with the greenbelt and was headed back south towards my house when all of a sudden it hit me. We are like that egg. We are children of Almighty God. Divinity in embryo we are. Living in a fallen world that is not of our true nature. The majority of the people of this world are on the fast track to hell and suffering and self-destruction. If they do not repent, they will be at least damaged and at worst outright destroyed, just as surely as that egg is not going to last. We no more belong with the people of this world on that road than that delicate chicken egg belongs on the highway. Just as that egg should be safely nested and nurtured where it belongs, so too we should keep ourselves safely nested on the covenant path, gathered under the wings of the Master. It is where we belong. And I want you to know He is watching, and He will gather, and He will nurture, and He will care for you. That I know. My friends, good night, God bless, and I will see you again on Sunday.